This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you for this Friday, March 16th show 318, that we're actually recording on Thursday, March 15th. I am not in the Brooklyn bunker. I am actually as far from the Brooklyn bunker as I've ever been. No, that's not true. We did record some shows when I lived in London in 2015, and I'm actually technically closer where I am right now in the Cotswolds, in Cheltenham, less than 50 yards from the racecourse, squatting in Dan Hardcore, one of the other top 10 pro punters in the UK today's place. Right here in Cheltenham. Excited to be here and getting over to the festival, but did not want to leave fans high and dry. This will not be a full-on 60-minute edition of the DRF Players Podcast. It will be a truncated version, but we wanted to get something out there, and one of the reasons we wanted to get something out there is I didn't think listeners would want to go a whole week without hearing the next voice you're about to hear. He's calling in from the planet Texas. He's the People's Champion. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
That was really funny. Pete, you know, they just don't know what to do without the hello and welcome. It's not really me. It's the hello and welcome that gets them going on a Tuesday and a Friday. So I appreciate the compliment, but we know that this thing goes because of you. I
don't know about that, but we could. You gave me an idea. We'll do a charity fundraiser. We could record some hello and welcome answering machine messages. It's a shame nobody listens to voicemail anymore. That would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think we should probably do the hello and welcome T-shirt as well.
That is not a bad idea. I like the idea of a whole series of shirts. I like hello and welcome. I like crush their souls. At some point, we'll have a whole DRF Players Podcast merchandise line out there in the world. But we probably should get a few other things organized first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Paco for President needs to be done. There's a few I can think of.
We'll have to give Jerry Bailey a royalty on that one, but I'd be willing to do that. Absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about tournaments before we dive into some general listener questions, and then we're going to talk about 3 races coming up from Oaklawn Park. But I was just curious, a few days have passed since that final table experiment for the new World Horseplayers Tour Preakness tournament that took place out at Santa Anita last weekend. What a world traveler I am, huh? But I was just curious to pick your brain a little bit about how you're feeling about this World Horseplayers Tour, what the vibes are, some of the feedback you've received from players about this new, to my mind, very exciting format.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of good stuff, man. A lot of people came up and said they were excited about it. Still a couple people that I think maybe were confused about a couple of things. So let me reiterate one of them. The $150,000 in prizes is 100% added. The World Horseplayers Tour is paying that money. It is not from the racetrack, and it's not from an entry fee. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's very similar to like what we saw at the Pegasus tournament. You know, obviously the Pegasus tournament came from that prize money came from the track, which was in turn somewhat like kind of a rebate. This is a completely different situation. So, but yeah, a lot of people were interested. A lot of people were excited. It sounds like a lot of people are saying that they're going to attend. So we'll see how it all works out. I think it should be good. Really, it's on a good weekend where it's kind of right in the middle of Derby and Belmont. So yeah, no, and the format was great. I was excited about how that went. Like we said before, the 2 times we've done these practice contests, we've started off people with random bankrolls to really simulate how we anticipate it will go. May 19th and May 20th, and the 2 people that started with the lead in both of our practice contests ended with 0. So I think that's kind of the exciting part of it, and the forced action, and looking forward to it. I think the rules are about final. They should be out, I would imagine, before the end of the week, where people can really dive in and see some of the ins and outs. I know we've talked about the things and as a whole, but it'll really kind of break them all the way down. I'm looking forward to it.
should be very fun. Definitely that effect of the bankroll converting to mythical at the final table, just like in a poker tournament, going to create a lot of movement and excitement, and hopefully going to make things look really cool for TV, which is the idea here. Show the fun of horse playing, show the great sport of horse racing, and hopefully introduce some new fans into the game. Folks looking to get involved can qualify exclusively at DRF tournaments. That's tournaments.drf.com. What's going on? Qualify the WHT Preakness right now, JK.
Yeah, there was a little event yesterday. Our buddy actually, as last time I checked, I'm going to double check now while I'm sitting here talking about it so I don't speak out of turn, but I'm pretty sure our friend Mike Ray qualified for the April 7th edition of the WHT qualifier yesterday in a feeder. Scored $61 yesterday playing all Tampa and Gulfstream. Mike Ray is a longtime friend and an honorary family member of the Matisse clan. So always good to see that. So what they're doing now is they're doing the $54 tournaments during the week. There'll be a $54 option on Saturday and Sunday, with Saturday also being a 1-in-4 $135 option to qualify for the $458 qualifier, the one that will actually get you the $5,000 seat into the WHT. That will not be until April 7th. It's kind of a long lead up, but April 7th racing is just remarkable, obviously, with the Bluegrass, the Wood, Santa Anita Derby. So we're saving it until that one event. I believe in the interim there's going to be a kind of a higher ratio. One of the things that I think, we try to avoid at DRF tournaments, but a higher ratio, maybe like a 1-in-35, $200-ish type of qualifier that somebody who might not want to swing the 458 could get involved in. That will happen not this weekend, I think, but the weekend after. But we'll make sure we let everyone know about that. We won't feed into that. We're going to just keep feeding into the April 7th event.
It's interesting. The different ratios suit different players. There are a lot of tournament players. They have their budget for the weekend. It might be $200. An event that could be absolutely perfect right in the wheelhouse. Don't have to. A lot of people love feeders and love getting day action. But if you have a job that doesn't really allow that, maybe you want to mess around with feeders. Maybe you just want to put up 200 and have your chance to win that 5,000 buy-in. And that ratio you mentioned, JK, still favorable compared to a lot of what you see out there. I think it's smart. Generally, the lower ratio tournaments, it's what DRF tournaments is known for. They're very appealing to me. They'd be appealing to me if I were a player. But you also have to acknowledge that different players have different needs. And the more we can do at DRFT to accommodate the greatest number of players, the better we're doing our job, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that for me, I prefer the lower ratio. I'd rather spend the extra couple dollars and do the lower ratio, because the truth of the matter is when I've done a lot of record keeping, I realize that those higher ratio events I don't do as well. But that's my handicapping personality with taking short price horses. I played DRF tournaments yesterday. And a 1-to-5 shot was the difference for me, and so those, and a 1-to-5 shot that I took, obviously that was the difference. And so those lower ratios really helped me out, because there was a lot of horses that ran yesterday that were probably, there was a 7-to-1 shot that won that no one in the contest I was playing in had. I appreciate those days, and that doesn't really take place in those higher ratio events.
No, higher ratio is going to necessarily mean you're playing against more players. So it's sort of a double whammy. And you're not just stating the obvious there, which is clearly your strike rate is going to be lower anytime it's 1-in-20 than when it's 1-in-5, say. However, you're talking about you're doing worse, like relative to your return on investment. In other words, your dollar isn't worth as much for you playing in those events with more people. A player who routinely comes up with creative long shots might even feel the exact opposite and prefer those situations and have a higher ROI there. So I encourage players to do what JK was talking about. Look at your records, keep records, and then try to tailor your play to the events where your dollar is worth more. That's something that's not just true in tournaments, but is also very true, of course, in the world of cash play. So now I have to ask you, JK, what is going on? Appreciate very much you getting up basically in the middle of the night to do this show with us today so we could do it with me on UK time. What in the world is going on in your apartment at this hour of the morning that you feel the need to mute every time I'm talking?
I always mute because I forget that I'm like on the phone. I'll start sniffling. I'm a lifelong asthmatic, so I've got allergies. I'm always carrying on, and who knows, burping, all kinds of things. So I'm trying to. I've created this force field that when I'm not talking, I just try to mute it so that I don't do something inappropriate to embarrass myself.
See, producer Craig would have a lot of fun with that on this blooper reel he's always threatening to put together. So I wouldn't work too much.
Just so you know, I don't think it's a threat. I think that I've clearly been recorded many times in out-of-the-gate blooper situations, and it will come out at some point. So he says he like him and AJ always talk. Ooh, that's a good one. Ooh, ooh, that's a good one.
And I'm pretty sure there is something about you muting on the bingo card. You've given away several squares here today, and those playing bingo along with us at home, they appreciate it very much.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. Like they say, people's champ. I'm here for the people.
I love it. I had a great note. I can't even remember. I think I sent this to you, but maybe I didn't. This was from listener Michael Salakis. I'm just going to read the whole thing. It's so good. Another Torontonian. Ontario having quite the run in the contest world. We talked a little bit about it on the last show, but with Robert Montgomery getting the job done at the Horseplayer World Series, in addition to the dominance the Canadians have shown in the NHC over the last few years. But we'll give a little more love to Canada, courtesy of this note from Michael. He says, "Hello, Peter. I'm not on Twitter yet, and I know that this is the main contact for the Players Podcast." He was sending it to the podcast email. But I hope the email gets through. It does. Emails podcast@drf.com. They come right to us. Just wanted to make a few comments and add a question to relay a story. He's emailed before that I love the show. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that. Great to hear you talking about the Woodbine Mile the other day. And he volunteers to buy us a drink the next time we make it up to Woodbine. Don't worry. No good deed goes unpunished. We'll make sure to do that, Michael. Story is as follows. Listening to the podcast, Jonathan has recently been talking about playing a one-on-one tournament to help cover the entry costs of other feeders and tourneys. So I figured I'd give it a try. I entered a $100 matchup on DRF tournaments. My competitor was already entered and waiting for me. Obviously, I was hoping to get a weaker player, but I was curious all day as to who my competition would be. When the tournament began, I clicked on the leaderboard and was stunned to see none other than the People's Champion as my opponent. I had a laugh at this because I always listen to the podcast, and obviously I respect both Kinchin and yourself as horse players. Suddenly the event became more than just a win or loss of a small sum of money. It was a chance to learn and grow as a player, and I think I did. As it turned out, neither of us had our best day, but I did manage to win 41.80 to 10.80. But to be fair, I do think I got a little lucky here, and I'm sure JK would beat me more often than I would beat him. I don't know. He might just finish up in the breakage, Michael. It might not quite beat you. In race 7 at Gulfstream, JK picked a horse named Fundy's Tide, who almost wired the field at long odds, but I was lucky enough that Royal Blessing closed like a freight train to get the win. It was fun for a bit player like myself to get a chance to play JK head-to-head, and I look forward to our next meeting. The question I have for you guys, if you have the chance to address it, thinking about going to the Kentucky Derby, what are the tracks, in our opinion, that would transfer well prep-wise to Churchill Downs? For example, you guys are always talking about how Gulfstream often favors speed on the dirt. How does that translate into Derby winners historically? Are there any preps that have produced winners regularly? So before we get to the question, JK, that's pretty funny, man. You got hoisted on your own petard there.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I remember that day. I got like $10. I couldn't find anything. So, yeah, but it's a good approach. It's one of my favorite approaches. I love that. I love doing that. Playing the head-to-head to cover the cost of your feeder. It's like I said before, I feel like I'm good enough to beat one guy most of the time, but it's harder to beat 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, or 20 Well, obviously on this day I wasn't good enough to beat one either. So it's definitely an approach that I've kind of evolved into, and I've also evolved into that rule that we've talked about, that I won't play, and you wrote about it actually in your piece talking about multiple entries, that I won't play multiple entries in feeders unless I use between 60 and 70% of the same horses on both. That's the only way I'll play two. Otherwise, I just play one. I realized I wasn't doing myself any favors.
Yeah, that gets back to that record keeping, the theme of this week's podcast, really, paying attention to what you do well. Just go about their lives or turn the page the next day. There's a lot can be done, taking even 5 minutes to record some results and try to learn something about yourself along the way. Definitely something that the successful players I know have in common. If you're not learning in this game, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, and those records are a great way to take care of that. Now, let's get on to this Derby-specific question. Do you have certain preferences when it comes to the Kentucky Derby as to where the contenders have been running, which preps, etc.?
No, I don't think it matters. I think it's, I just think that obviously, I guess you would want to say that the Florida Derby winner is usually one that you want to pay attention to, because that's kind of the epicenter of East Coast racing in the winter, right? It's where Todd is. It's where Chad is. It's where Mott is, Clement. All of these really kind of powerful guys that have a lot of really nice horses. It's where their whole operations usually are based. Of course, I'd be remiss if, the Orb winning. So those people, I think those horses run well, but not so much because it's the racetrack or the weather or the whatever. I just think it's like there's a lot more good horses there than there is up in New York, and that there is shipping in to Keeneland, because it feels like the Bluegrass, although it's a very prominent and popular race, it's just kind of a little bit of the it's not the second tier. I think that a lot of more horses run in Florida and or in LA at Santa Anita. So those two races typically are ones that I would look at, but it's not. I don't want it to seem like it has anything to do with the racetrack or the situation. I also think that the Florida Derby for a long time was like 6 weeks away, and I don't know if they've adjusted that now. I don't pay a ton of attention to that. But with it being 6 weeks away, I think the trend of giving horses more time became very appealing to trainers with talented, good, well-meant horses to get that extra little time to prepare for the Derby. So, but I don't think it's really a surface thing. So I wouldn't look at that being the reason that those horses excel.
Yeah, you might find certain days of big prep races that had a strong bias or something that might not translate. I mean, generally speaking, not talking about Triple Crown contenders, but there are plenty of horses that do well in Florida that form does not translate, having something to do potentially with the racing surface. But with these Triple Crown prep races, I think there are larger factors at play here, like Jonathan is mentioning. Now, take a race like the Wood Memorial. Historically, incredibly important race, has not produced the Derby success in recent years. What do you make of that, Jonathan? Are you at a point, is that prominent enough where at this point you would deduct points from a horse that had its final prep in the Wood Memorial, or are you just looking at that like something that's somewhat random and you're just going to evaluate the horses on an individual basis?
No, I just think it's completely random. I mean, there might be something to it, right? I mean, winter racing in Aqueduct hasn't really been. I don't want to say it's been. It hasn't been thriving as of late. So you would think that maybe that has something to do with it. But at the same time, it's like the horses that usually go there and win aren't based there anyways. I don't think it's a problem at all. I mean, there was nice horses there. If you look back in time, I think I Want Revenge obviously didn't get a chance to run. Escandrea probably would have won the Triple Crown.
You really think that?
Escandrea?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2010. What was that? That was the year with That wasn't mine. Was that? No, it wasn't Mine That Bird. It was 2010. So it was Mine That Bird.
Mind That Bird was 2009, wasn't he?
Yes, he was 9 because Big Brown was 2008. Oh, I'm trying to remember who Escandrea was because it's actually
won the Triple Crown. Just sound. I don't even care who it was. It just sounds extreme.
He was good. No, he was really good.
I know he was good, but it's just obviously a big ask. 2010 was a Super Saver year. Maybe that's factoring into it for you a little bit.
Yeah, that wasn't the strongest of years. And then Verrazano was a nice horse. He just wasn't supposed to go that long. And then Frosted won the race. Irish War Cry won the race. I mean, I just think it's just circumstantial. I think the right horse will win at some point. It's just I think that it being in New York and no one really being based in New York is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because I was definitely one of the proponents of the idea of don't bet, the East Coast sprinters in the Breeders' Cup. So I do sometimes come up with angles similar to this, but for some reason this one I'm not very comfortable with, and I don't want to downgrade horses running in New York. And I can't really explain why that is. It's a gut feel thing for me.
But what is troublesome. We've got. I heard this from Mike Maloney when we were out in Vegas having lunch. I don't know if you remember, but he was telling stories of the old days. Not that he's old or anything, but you know what I mean. But he was telling stories, and it reminded me of the same theme: is that New York horses are typically overbet in the Derby just because there's a big group of people who grew up watching the Wood Memorial, and that was the thing that mattered. And so the winner of the Wood with them is kind of elevated in that those horses sometimes can take a little bit more money than they probably deserve.
A lot of people look at these, what you might call macro trends, where a horse prepped, certain trainer statistics, these ideas. And there's a lot of people who've had a lot of success doing it. So this is not a criticism of those who do it, but it's almost like a school of player that's just very different from the school that you and I come from, JK, where I'm generally speaking much more interested at looking at the data in front of me and trying to figure out an internal pace angle or some sort of hidden angle of why a horse is developing, and really looking at the matchup, the competition that we see. You can really only know the intricacies of once a race is drawn, and we try to find our winners that way, as opposed to from that sort of that other, you might call it a higher level. I don't mean it in any judgmental way, but just looking at not drilling down to today's race, but looking at the trend of all races. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we're just not trends guys, why we don't buy into some of this stuff.
Well, yeah, what it feels like to me, which is one of the most annoying things. A lot of people probably got done filling out their brackets recently, and one of the things I hate more than anything in sports is, Kentucky has never beat Mississippi State when they're a 4 seed or above. What? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happened in 1974 between a group of guys wearing maroon jerseys and a group of guys wearing royal blue. It's completely it doesn't make a difference. And so for me, it's I think a lot of these stats sometimes can just be completely ridiculous and circumstantial. And I get it. It's why sports is fun. We can talk about that kind of stuff. But I wasn't interested in that situation when it comes to sports, and I don't really apply it much when it comes to racing.
Yeah, we had another question about this. I wish I could remember the specifics, but I started writing a long response on Twitter and decided I wanted to talk about it on the show. The point I wanted to make was that while those trends can matter and they can guide you to winners, and some people have their approach rooted in them, and if you look at the world that way, and that's how you're studying, I'm not going to knock it. Whatever works, there's a lot of different ways to get you through. But for me, the present is not predicated upon the past in a way where especially small sample size statistics like that, you're just not going to find enough signal in them for me, the way that I look at the world, to spend a whole lot of time doing that. That said, the kind of angles I'd be interested in would have to do with, like, if the numbers bored out, I'm making up an example here, but looking at travel miles, say, in the NCAA tournament or in horse racing. I remember reading that as an angle in a book I read over here, is looking at, somebody had done a statistical analysis of the horse who shipped the farthest to come to a particular race meet. Now, this is relevant in the UK because the horses don't train at racetracks. They train in private training yards. And for some brief time, Nick Morden or whoever it was found a positive ROI betting on the horses who shipped in from the farthest away. There's a logic to that to me. Looking at an event like the NCAA tournament, there's a logic to me that it's a disadvantage to be shipping for your first round 3,000 miles from home against a team for whom it's more or less of a home game. So I don't throw this stuff out. I think it's interesting. I like to hear about it and judge it, but it's not something that I'm going to get overwhelmed by. Do you ever come up with angles or see angles or hear about angles like the ones I just mentioned that you're interested in for sports or horse betting?
The only good angles that they're out there in sports betting and even in racing itself are the angles that the market knows about and they already bet, right? Like, I like the angle when a East Coast team in football plays on the West Coast at the noon game, because, or the other way around, excuse me, the West Coast team goes to the East Coast, plays the noon game where effectively it's like 8 o'clock in the morning for them. Like that. I mean, like those. But the market knows that, right? So it's not, the back-to-back in basketball, which is like not really a trend. It's just
on the road.
Yeah, it's not really a trend. It's just a very obvious thing. Yeah, it's just an obvious, simple thing that when you're playing in a back-to-back. So no, there's not too many that I think that I probably. I'm sure there's some baseball ones that are good. I think famously we've talked about, and I don't know if he was the one that determined it or not, but Roxy Roxborough, who we actually saw this weekend, talked about the wind at Wrigley, things like that.
Yeah, I think if you have a creative brain and you have access to data, you're going to continue to be able to find things. The specifics of the Roxy one was over-unders at Wrigley Field. For the longest time, it wasn't correlated at all to what the wind was doing. Obviously, Wrigley, very famously, winds blowing in, very hard to hit a home run. Winds blowing out, forget about it. They'll be out on Waveland Avenue all day. And to have that information of what the wind was doing provided a tremendous edge. I have one. I probably shouldn't give this away, but I'm going to do this as a special one for pod listeners, because it was a very cool one that I heard from a racing pundit over here named Barry Faulkner, who I met in the Arkle Bar before the races yesterday. One of the great Cheltenham rituals is getting over there early and having a chance to meet up with some friends for drinks and whatever and discuss the day's racing. And you always seem to meet somebody fun. And Barry was telling me an angle he had on the Rugby World Cup, which was simply that the teams, the big team, in English betting especially, the big teams, the teams people are familiar with, would just very frequently in the point spread market be expected to beat lesser countries by too many points. In other words, you could take the dog and the points, and over the years he's a massive record keeper and just a tremendous ROI. I'm just going to make stuff up. I don't know that much about rugby, but Japan or Tunisia plus 44 against a bigger nation. And he just felt like it had to do with the more famous teams obviously having so much support and people wanting to bet on them, and also the nature of rugby, whereas the game went on, all of a sudden England doesn't care if they win by 30 or 44. And, in the NFL, point spread's the great equalizer, very efficient, but you're not dealing with those kind of like outsized numbers. And in a sport like college football here, you see those outsized spreads, and they're typically right. Coaches want, because there's so few games, coaches want style points. You'll still see Alabama win by 40. It wouldn't be a rare thing. But in rugby, this is this little nuance that he's found. I'm pretty excited, actually, JK, for 2019 or whenever the next Rugby World Cup is, to give this angle a try. So creative bettors, whether you're talking sports or horses, if your brain works this way, it's kind of cool. Do the work. Try to come up with something. But yeah, for me, I don't want to overuse that stuff. I'd rather spend the time, rather than doing the data studies you'd have to do, I'd rather spend that time reading the form.
Yeah, no, I mean, reading the form and then understanding the actual dynamics of the gameplay that are going to be had. You know, in my past, when I used to bet a lot of football when I was in college, and then obviously, you know, I kind of slowed down when I was coaching because we worked on Saturdays and Sundays, so it was tough. But because I'm the kind of guy, especially with racing too, like I have to watch my bet. If it's a race, like it can be $7, it can be a $22 matchup contest, and like I have to watch my bet. It's the weirdest thing, but you know, I just like to focus on like the strategies and the ins and outs of the actual matchup, and I think I handicap the same way. Like I don't so much care about you know, it's just weird because some of them apply. I was gonna say a joke, like I don't really care about Steve Asmussen in July. But there could be something to the Steve Asmussen in July thing. There could be something more than just some silly trend. It could be maybe him pointing for spots, things like that. So you have to be careful not to be dismissive if you're my type of brain when it comes to looking at these things. But I think you also don't want to allow these kind of you know, extreme situations to creep into your decision making.
One idea I had that I've never done anything about, I've talked about this with Sean Borman, as part of record keeping, include a field, the reason you made the bet. So, in other words, you'd separate out the tips you got at the bar, and you could see what ROI that was. Or you could say, you know, this is from a bucket of trend plays I try to make. Or you could say it was a trip play, a bias play, a fundamentals of handicapping play, a price play, whatever the categories you want. But if you could do that for a year and go back, I bet you'd learn a lot about yourself as a player. That's one I haven't been disciplined enough to do. And obviously it's tricky because a lot of times it's more than one angle. But do you think that's an interesting idea to try to flag up your bets that way and see what the situation is?
I do think so. And if you're interested in that idea and you were going to do it, my piece of advice to make it easier would be to do it in an Excel sheet and to find, I don't know, 5 words: info, trip, pace, you know, whatever it might be. You'll bias, whatever. And then you want to use one word so that you can then actually really sort it and actually see, you know, and actually really have the numbers. If you write like a 3 or 4 word explanation, you're not going to really be able to track it. It'll all be different. So it's definitely something that could be interesting.
2 others I'd add: paddock. Like for a paddock play, for those of us who do that from time to time, and also clocker. You know, I'm pretty sure you have a good ROI with bets based on clocker info. You seem to me, JK, to be able to process that info as well as anybody. But you know, I'd be curious to really know. You know, my gut is that you do much better with stuff from pro clockers than tips that you hear around the racetrack. But it would be great to have the data and know what the story is.
Live by the tip, die by the tip.
Hey, let's talk about a race that we escaped our notice on the last show. I don't know if you've seen it, but I have a quick anecdote about it regardless. Mendelssohn. Did you see Mendelssohn made his return to the races? This, of course, is the Aidan O'Brien horse that won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. Made me look like a jerk to Paul Matisse when I thought he was coming off a bias-aided win at Newmarket. Maybe not so much. Wins the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. And is now pointed to the Kentucky Derby and came back at Dundalk on March 9th with a victory. Did you see the race?
I didn't. He won, huh?
He won. It was a bit of a battle. It looked inefficiently run. I believe Simon Rowlands on Twitter had written this kind of take, if you don't know the terminology, but a 107% finishing speed. In other words, they finished up much quicker. To dumb it down, they finished up much quicker then they got to the pace call suggesting that it was slowly run, and he came home quickly. I asked another pro punter friend of mine over here who makes Beyer-style speed figures for UK and Irish racing about it. He hadn't done the figure yet, but he did say, yeah, he looked, he looked well enough, but he was beating trees. So I think the journey. I thought that was a good.
You ever hear someone say something and you say to yourself, please give me the power to remember that and say it again when I should, and let it be part of my everyday vocabulary.
Beating trees. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on Mendelssohn, and we'll see how he's doing. I mean, it seems it's an incredibly big ask, but I mean, you got to remember this horse, kin to Beholder, kin to Into Mischief, already got to be one of the most valuable horses in training, just from a breeding proposition, and going to be just an interesting subplot on the Derby Trail this year to see what this one does. Is there a world in which you could ever see throwing a horse like this in, JK, to your wagering, and what would that world be?
Yeah, the problem is that the horse, yes, there is a world, and the world is when he gets here early enough and he works over the surface, and the clockers and the clocker to the stars especially, JTC lets me know that the thing can run, then it's definitely an include. But he's going to get off the plane, he's going to gallop around there, and they're going to say, he likes blah, blah, blah. You're never going to know, and you just got to close your eyes and hope it doesn't happen, because you can't put money on the horse without knowing a little bit more. At least I can't, for me. So, I do have a question, though. Is this – obviously I know his merits. Is the Gronkowski horse just because of the name? Is that why we see this on Twitter and why people are talking about it? He's not very good.
Well, I don't want to be that guy, right? Who's like, oh, he's not very good. But that would be a much bigger surprise for a variety of reasons. And the form of that race does not look like Kentucky Derby form. But here's the thing: they're going to come here and run in a prep, which, as somebody who is a sporting fan, that's going to be real interesting. We'll get an idea of where he stands. I was sort of hoping Gronkowski would beat another weaker field over there, come to Churchill and take money just because of the name, because he'd be at least unexposed. Now we're going to get a chance, it sounds like, to see how good that runner really is.
They both ran on Poly, right?
Yeah, it was both wax races, yes. Dundalk, O'Brien's used as a springboard before. It's just so hard. It's hard to know how the surface switch is going to affect horses. Here's one cool thing I heard that I definitely want to pass along. This one came from my man Kevin Blake, and this could affect Mendelssohn. You know how Aidan O'Brien – I'll ask it as a question, and we'll see if – hopefully you'll pick up what I'm laying down here. There's a trip note you've probably written on every Aidan O'Brien horse, even the ones with tactical speed that have run in the United States over the last 5 years. Do you know what that trip note, to begin your trip note, would be?
Off slow?
Exactly. Off slow 1, off slow 2, whatever it is. O'Brien has apparently had a USA-style starting gate shipped to Ballydoyle, presumably in an effort to rectify this problem. And it's hard not to think of Mendelssohn when you hear about this, knowing, Mendelssohn runs third in the Kentucky Derby. We were talking before about what a valuable horse this is, given the pedigree and the accomplishments already. Can you imagine some black type on dirt, what they're going to do for his for his potential future as a stallion? And, leave it to O'Brien. We talked before about with punters how if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. I think you can make that case for trainers too. And Aidan O'Brien, I think that's a pretty cool example of it. I just thought that was really interesting, JK.
I saw that tweet actually, and I saw the video of them, the gate and then popping away from the gate, and there's 8 of them in there, which was hilarious. I also remember it reminded me of one of the greatest tweets of all time, and it was not a retweet; it was an original tweet from Norm Cassie, where he was doing a gate work, I think at Palm Meadows, and he had 3 horses in the gate, and he did it straight from the side, and they popped the gate, and 2 of them broke out of there like they're supposed to, and one of them literally walked out of the gate. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. If you can find it, I don't know where it is in his Twitter feed. It's probably pretty deep in there. Norm's a tweeter, so you probably have to find, but it's hilarious. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
I think you should take one for the team.
I'll find it and retweet it.
I'll find it and retweet it. Exactly. Maybe put a comment on it this time. But yeah, I mean, if you go through the media thing, I mean, how far back? He's not like tweeting videos every day. You should be able to find that. I think you should.
Norm is a man of media.
He's off out on his own now as a trainer. I haven't been paying too much attention to what's been going on, but I'm certainly interested to follow his career throughout this year and beyond. And obviously a guy we root for, a friend of the podcast, and an excellent trainer and all-around good guy. So yeah, find that and send it around, and we'll get some people to participate in the amusement that will surely come. All right, should we talk about 3 races real quick and then get out of here a little early this week? You good with that?
Yeah, let's do it. I gotta flip back over off this Twitter page. All right, I'm good now.
There's a pint of Guinness with my name on it, and I still have to do this whole 2,500 word write up on the Rebel Stake. So I've got the clock is ticking. Why don't we start off talking about race 8 at Oak Lawn on St. Patrick's Day, Saturday. It's the Essex, a mile and a 16th for older colts, obviously, on the dirt. Where'd you end up here, JK?
Yeah, here's the thing, the theme that you're going to have to think about, I think, for these 3 races and at Oak Lawn is that, we talked about it right after the Southwest. We joked that when I was looking at the Will Pays, I saw all these 1 horses. And that had won the previous races, and look, the inside was a nice place to be, but I think something that you need to be aware of when you're looking at bias stuff, and I've never really talked to Mike about this before. I'd love to talk to Mike about it. Is that you have to be careful when a horse runs really well into the teeth of a bias on a sloppy track, because you can't tell if they really liked the sloppy track, if that's what moved them up, and then when they get them back on a dry surface, regardless of where they were running on that sloppy track, they're not going to run as good. Or vice versa, if a horse runs poorly with in the good part of the track, it could be because they liked the surface. So that's a little bit tricky. I'm going to look for horses that were running wide on Southwest Day, and Leo Frick for Cox is one here that I'm going to use. That sounds Irish. Am I right with that?
I'd give you that. There's a Gaelic feel to that, though I can't. It's not a term or a name I'm familiar with, and I don't see any connection in the pedigree that would send me that way. But I think I'll give it to you at the very least in off the goalpost, and it is St. Patrick's Day, so everybody's Irish.
Exactly. You look back January 14th at Oak Lawn. Horse ran really well that day. Got the win, closed into a couple of blue fractions on time form, but was wide all the way around there. Then shows up and is wide when they turn for home against a Hawakam who freaked in the Razorback. I think Leo Frick will be tough. I'd imagine some of these other horses, some of the Todds and whatnot, will take some money. I don't know why Petrov is now going a mile and a 16th. I thought we just decided that Petrov was a one run closing sprinter, but I guess we're going to give it another shot going 2 turns. Leo Frick for me in this spot.
All right, let's move on to the Azeri, a grade 2 on 6 for sacks on Saturday.
I wanted to pick Blue Eyes, but it just feels like off of a break that is just a apple blossom. So I don't feel like we'll get her best effort. She's good enough to win if you feel that she's one. She's definitely one I would take into account. Looks like they're running here. There's quite a few Ford fillies. Terra Promesa, obviously, Fordly placed, runs really well at Lawn. Farrell, Fordly placed, well in the slop last time, but the rate 2 back good. I ended up with Actress. I'm going to stick to the Jason Service. It didn't do me any good last week. Actually, I think in second, but Actress is one that I've always kind of dismissed. She continues to excel. I thought she ran well enough at Houston. She was 7th early parts of the race, but she was still close enough to a quick pace and finished getting a setup that day. I'm going to use Actress in this spot, depending on the price, of course. But I don't think she'll be. I don't see how she'd be favored. I would think Tara Pro Mason usually takes a lot of money there for Asmussen, Farrell. I would also think that Martini Glass might take a little bit of money shipping up for Keith Nations. But Actress for me in the Azeri.
Have you done any research on what article of clothing or hairstyle you're going to adopt for your Jason Service fan clubdom?
No, I need to look. I'll Google that right now. Let's see he's a fair-skinned gentleman, I believe. So that's we're not going to help with the natural hairstyle. Let's see what I got here. Ooh.
For people who have not seen JK lately, this was something I wanted to mention. At his Twitter handle, which always gets questions, at UT Big Hair. The hair's getting there, JK. You're earning your Twitter handle once again. What's the plan?
Well, I don't know. I had this idea of like growing it out, and then I started to kind of grow it out, like not like crazy long or anything, and then now it's just like I've re-upped my hat collection, so I'm just hatting a little bit more. I'll have to figure something out at some point in the near future, but for now it's working.
Speaking of the hats, what's with all the Yankees gear? I didn't even think you were a baseball fan.
Some guy on the airplane the other day, a flight attendant, he said to me, how many championships have the Yankees won? And I said, more than everybody else.
Well, you got that right. What did he say to that?
I think he told me like 26 or something. Is it 26?
It is 27, I believe. 27. As a Mets fan, it's like information that's in my head that I try to forget, but I do believe, if we're being fair, it's 27 World Championship.
No, I don't have an allegiance to a baseball team. Obviously, I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so if they're playing on TV and it matters, I guess I root for the Rangers, but I don't really care.
I've never heard you mention the Rangers. I've known you for like 5 years now, so I'm just saying, if they're on TV, I'm like, oh, go Rangers, but I don't really care. It's funny, we joke about my brother being the DJ and stuff. Well, the company that makes all those hats, New Era, that makes all the baseball hats, obviously they're very popular in popular culture as well, with just different whatever. They send him all these hats. And so every time I go to his house, I just steal hats. And he usually has Yankee hats, so I just take them. Makes sense. I hope this buzzing that's coming through on my phone is not coming through on the broadcast. Apologies if so. Somebody is doing that thing playing in a fantasy baseball league where they're like dropping players one by one. So my phone has been absolutely blowing up, and I sure hope it's not coming through. Apologies if it is. I will get that sorted. Let's do one more race and call it a show, JK. It is the Rebel, race 10, mile and a 16th. Potential triple crown implications here for sure. Your buddy Solamini. Who you picking?
If we play in a contest together and you beat me with this horse, I'm gonna be very upset. But Combatant. I said it the day after the race. I said it minutes after the race. When he comes back, I'm gonna play him. I'm nervous. It could be the muddy thing. It could be the off track thing. But I'm going to give him another shot. It's in Asmussen's backyard of Oaklawn, where he does really well. Has a little bit of a look of a creator type for me. The kind of the late running type. I think that even if he doesn't win here, a third or a second here, and on to the to the Arkansas Derby is definitely a horse that I would consider playing underneath or a long shot opportunity come Derby Day.
All right, I like it. Any other quick thoughts on the Rebel? Folks can get my thoughts through the Derby Countdown Guide. I'm still in the middle of going through all the form, but I will have thoughts on it eventually. But and anything else that leaps out to you in this race in terms of another to maybe include?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely include Sporting Chance, for Lucas. The comeback race off of the 168-day break since the Hopeful. Not that Louis Saez is a problem, but now he gets Johnny. I think that Sporting Chance could be tough as well if it happens to be a surface thing that Combatant was excelling upon.
And your thoughts on Solamini, who's seemingly gone from the A team to the C team in the Baffert barn. But Baffert sent some good ones to this Rebel Stakes over the years, and is that maybe a sign of things to come, or is it just make sense with the overall plan?
It's just one of those deals. We talked about it last week when Todd has the third or fourth choice, or Chad Brown has the third or fourth choice, or has a horse that maybe not the third or fourth choice. Excuse me, the third or fourth most likely winner in your opinion. You just can't play him because they're going to be bet differently than that. And Solomini's going to get bet because it's Baffert, especially at Oaklawn Park. God bless the wonderful people at Oaklawn, but there's a lot of amateurs that show up to the racetrack on these big days at Oaklawn, and they just want to get down on a little win bet, a little win play show. And you would imagine that Baffert's going to be the most overbet win play show horse in the Rebel. So, if he wins, then I lose. I'll just try to beat him.
And that happens. I mean, in fact, the horse that you made this point about the other week, I believe, was Maraud, who ended up winning. But I think that's a situation where it's not like after Maraud wins, you regret that position. And you, by your reckoning, third most likely winner was going to catch a lot more money than that. When horses like that beat you, what's your attitude?
Yeah, whatever. Turn the page. I mean, he's going to absolutely be overbet. I mean, he's a Grade 1 winner, and on the form, he beat McKenzie. So on the form, he's going to be completely overbet, and I don't want anything to do with him in this spot. So I'll just hold my breath and hope that he doesn't beat me.
Closing thought. Any further thoughts on the DQ situation that we spent such a long time talking about on Tuesday's show? Has your opinion evolved at all? Or are you still where you were back on Tuesday or Monday, whenever that was we last talked?
Yeah, no, I'm in the same place. I think that it was a decision that didn't need to be made, and that you have to take into account the entire race, not just the last 12 seconds or 6 seconds, I guess, of the race. That's not all that matters.
Fair enough. I agree. All right, that's it. Let's call it, JK. Lots of work to do. We almost went an hour. Fun talking to you as always. And thanks for joining in. Thanks to producer Craig for getting up early to make this happen as well. Travis Stone and Willie Nile for providing our open. For more of Willie's music, check out willienile.com. That Stone guy you can find calling races over at Churchill Downs if you want to hear more from him. Got to thank everybody for listening and tuning in, especially those of you who send in questions and those of you who provide positive reviews of the show on iTunes. Helps other people find it, and we appreciate that very much as well. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. Not sure when we'll be back. Going to be scrambling. I'm going to be over here next week. We'll have at least one show. I don't know if it'll be early or late in the week, but we will. You'll hear our mellifluous tones at some point through your earbuds or the speakers of your car, however you consume your podcast. You'll hear from us next week at some point. Until then, may you win all your photos.